In the search for spiritual connection, there are some who are drawn to the old ways and the gods of their ancestors. It's a deep connection that calls them back to their ancestral spiritual roots. The echoes of these beliefs can still be found in some of our cherished holidays, events, and traditions, and you might never know it. Theodism seeks to take the embers of that ancient ancestral belief and rekindle them into a flame. These are the beliefs of the Anglo-Saxon people with roots shared by their Norse and other Germanic cousins. I recently sat down with Þórbeorht and The Ealdríce to discuss Theodism and its focus not just on spirituality, but the reconstruction of the tribal community that supports it. But I've been very excited about this conversation because I think, and I'm just going to jump right into it if you're okay and ready.
Sure.
I think a lot of people, especially considering everything that we just gone through, there's a lot of people that want to find spiritual connection, and they want to find deeper meaning in life and who they are as a person, which I think ties in a lot with Theodism. And it's something I think I mentioned to you before in my own search, looking into things like Asatru and things like that. In those sort of, I'll say, ancestral belief systems that we have, there may be a piece of that almost feels like it's connected to us on a deeper level, if you know what I mean. It's almost built into our DNA to have that drive to learn it and to understand it, and in a way, hopefully, understand us a little bit better in the process,
Right.
So I kind of want to start there because I think Theodism may be a new concept for a lot of people. So if you could just dive in and give us a summary for those of us out there that don't know much about Theodism and they're just kind of getting introduced to it now. Can you do that?
Sure, I'd be glad to. So Theodish belief is a rekindling of the ancient many-goded belief that was held by our Anglo-Saxon, Germanic, and Norse ancestors. So it was, as a movement begun in 1976 in Watertown, New York, by Garvin Lord. And in it, we seek to reconnect to the worship of our elder gods and goddesses, and to worship them in such a way as our ancestors once did. So a large part of what we do as Theodsmen is our ritual year is based upon the agricultural seasons. So each one of our holy tides is tied into some sort of aspect of agriculture or livestock raising.
Gotcha. Well, it's very interesting to me because I know looking through, a lot of people are familiar with what I would call the Norse aspects of these Germanic gods. So you would mention things like Odin or Thor, in which case, the Theodish counterpart to that would be Woden or Thunor, and these sort of things. So is there, I'm very curious because this is very research intensive to try to rebuild these ancient structures. So
Sure.
how do you go about researching that and pulling those puzzle pieces together to understand what it was before? I'm assuming you have something like, let me pull this out over here. You have, something like the Poetic Edda or something like that you're getting some clues off of. Or are there aspects of this that are, for lack of a better term, divinely inspired?
Well, so there's a lot in Theodish belief that, of course, Theodish belief is primarily Anglo-Saxon. So Old English might be the lingua franca within the Theodish reach of these days. Most Theodish fellowships or Theods hold to an Anglo-Saxon thew, that is an Anglo-Saxon custom. But of course, it may, depending upon the particular folk that constitute that Theod or where they're geographically located, some of them may be a bit Anglo-Norse, some of them may draw from some Gothic roots or some Frankish roots or things of this sort. at least amongst Anglo-Saxon Theodsmen, which, like I said, is the majority of Theodsmen, in many ways, our old religion never fully died out. It certainly stopped being practiced formally. But when you look at things, for example, the names for the days of the week, right? So here it is, we're having this chat on Freya's Day, right? Named after Freya, the wife of Woden, right? So for most of the days of the week, as we say, this is Wednesday, it is Woden's Day. We're claiming it to be the day of Woden. Also, even in Christianity, they tend to refer to the resurrection instead of Pascha, as you might do in most other countries, as Easter or Easter, named after the ancient, really Indo-European goddess of the dawn and the beginning of the summer. There are so many different traditions that we draw upon that were kept alive up until as recently as World War I. So for example, Morris dancing, mummers play, maypole dancing, all these things are tied into the agricultural year. And there's a lot of these traditions that were even kept alive in the church. Things, for example, when the year begins to lengthen, when Lengthen occurs, as we'd say in Old English, right? And you have Solomanath, which is roughly February. When you begin to notice that there's sun, the days are getting longer, right? So it's the sun month. There was an ancient tradition recorded by Bede in his Ecclesiastical History of the English Peoples, where he talks about how it was named Solmanath, sun month, because of the flat cakes that they offered, right? Well, this is kept alive in the Anglican tradition today with Pancake Tuesday, right? Where they have a celebration, this feast of pancakes, these flat cakes in the shape of the sun at the beginning of Lent, the Lententide, right? The lengthening of the year. And so my own background is I studied to be an Anglican priest and got fairly close with it before I discovered Danish belief. So even though it had been around for my entire life since 1976, I was able to look at a lot of the rural folk traditions kept alive in parishes throughout England and bring those forward into Theodish belief today. Many of them were there. Theodsmen had already recognized these things, but there's so much in the living tradition of our people that calls to us. And I think that's one of the things that resonates. I mean, for example, you introduce Yale or Yule to people, like, I've never heard of this. And you say, well, have you ever heard of Deck the Halls, as we sing the ancient Yuletide carols? And suddenly it comes on. Or, like I said, wassailing the apple orchards, which we'll be doing here at Twelfth of Nicht, just in a couple of weeks hence. That's a tradition that carried on in caroling, right? Christmas caroling. You know, the Christmas ham being from the sacred swine that would have been slaughtered for the Yuletide feast and so forth. So there's so much that we can connect to because we already know. In a sense, the elder troth it's strange, it's uncouth, it's unknown to us, but it's also couth and kin. It's kith and kin. It's known and familiar as well, because it truly is our inheritance. So that's one thing that we as Theodsmen draw particularly from. You mentioned our Norse siblings. Historically speaking, Norse heathenry and Anglo-Saxon heathenry, the differences between them were few and not terribly significant. There are some differences, right? There's some differences between Old Norse and Old English, for example, right? And there's some differences in the customs between the people, but for the most part, their gods were the same, right? So there is that comparative mythology we can draw upon, and we would be at a loss if it were not for the sources that the Norsemen left us, such as the Eddas. You pointed out the poetic Edda there. So we have the Norse tradition of our siblings there. We have also comparative mythology for our cousins amongst the Celts or amongst the Slavs or the people, the Baltic regions, for example. So we utilize a bit of that, even if it, you know, Roman, the entire Indo-European tradition. Sometimes it's even helpful to look at ancient Vedic texts in this, but there's a lot more between us and India. So for example, we tend to look towards things like not just English histories, but law codes, penitentials, which are prescriptions by the church forbidding certain practices. It's really useful. If the church said, don't do this because it's heathen, then my apologies. We can take a look at that as maybe this is something we should look into. And quite often the church has misunderstood the practice, but nonetheless, there's something there for us to look into. And so we've got that. Oh my gosh, there's old charters, there's old wills. There's such a trove of material. And then when you get it, you have to compare it to what we already know. Does it fit somewhere? Does it shed some light upon something? One of the big things Theodism are known for is linguistic anthropology, etymology, word lore. The meaning of words has been very important for reconstructing our practices. Once you truly understand what a word meant at the time, it can help you recapture the worldview of our ancestors, which is what we're trying to reconnect with. So there's a great deal there. It's amazing how much. I think in one of the chapters in my book of ghost and god pools, I think I might even talk about pollen samples, right? So as indications of deforestation and how that impacted the migration, the folk wandering of our people, and how this upset certain ancient holy cult sites and maybe impacted the religion in that way. So there's a lot, believe it or not, there's much more than most people would have you believe that there is. And in one sense, because we've taken the Anglo-Saxon approach, we're almost at an advantage because there is no body of Anglo-Saxon poetry. I mean, there's plenty of Anglo-Saxon poetry, and even the Christian poetry a lot of times will have heathen themes running through it. But we wouldn't be able to recognize that without the Norse. But because we don't have an Anglo-Saxon Edda, right, that means we've had to be more resourceful. And in that sense, it's honestly been a gain to us. Because, having to not just say, well, I've got this easy handbook that I can reference for my beliefs, we've had to really dig and become quite good at it. So,
right. That's fantastic. And it reminds me of, in my own childhood and stuff, I remember there would be studies of, if you wanted to fully understand biblical text or something like that, then they would study Old Greek, and find the Greek meaning of the words which some of the texts were written in, or Aramaic or something like that. And then I've spoken to Muslims before, and the Muslims say, well, you can read the Quran in its translated form, but the Quran, to be fully understood, needs to be read in Arabic to understand the full meaning of the words that are being said, right? And so I find a lot of connection there, because words themselves have a lot of rich meaning behind them. There's a lot of Greek words in original, biblical texts that have 6 or 7 different meanings for our one meaning for a certain word, that we might lose some of that flavor of what the word really means, One of the interesting things that I wanted to ask you about was, when I would research a lot of Asatru type lore and dig into some of the kindreds, there are kindreds out there for those folks that are studying the Norse path of this, and that is a sense of community, but it almost feels like Theodsman in Theodish tradition is trying to create kind of the original tribal sort of culture and customs and experience of our ancestors. And I wanted to ask you about that. I wanted to ask you about what is the hope to be gained in returning to that sort of system, and really, how does that intertwine with Theodish belief, and where do you see that changing maybe cultural beliefs as we continue to grow, as Theodism continues to grow from where it is now?
That's quite a question. I'll do my best to start answering it in part, and if I leave something out, let me know.
Yeah.
So Theodish belief, the proper name for it, Theodish is Old English for tribal belief, right? Because in elder times, religions didn't have names, because religions weren't simply a set of creeds and a set of practices that one could ascribe to or adopt, right? They were very much so part of your tribal identity. If you would have asked an ancient Anglo-Saxon, what his belief was, he would have told you it was the belief of his tribe. The same way, if you would have asked a Sioux Indian what their belief was, they would have said that they were Sioux. Or if you would have asked someone from the tribe of Judah what their belief was, they would say they were Jewish, right? So they would give you the name of their tribe, right? So it is tribal, and in Danish belief, there's a great emphasis put upon community, right? So we have a communal connection to the gods through the offerings that we give. So wevedenes and priests and blotras, another word for priest, will make offerings on behalf of the folk. A lot of times the folk will contribute to these offerings, and they'll make offerings and then receive from the gods hal. Hal meaning luck, right? Or favor, right, or blessing, which then is then bestowed upon the folk. And so you have this relationship of gift giving between the folk and the gods, but also gift giving between the folk, right? And the folk are bound to one another through what we call a web of oaths. So there may be some oaths sworn between a man and his slaughtered, his loafwarder, his lord, right? And that might be a hold oath. There might be guild oaths sworn between different guildsmen, if they're in a holy guild. There will be oaths, wedded oaths between one, of course, spouses. There may be friendship oaths, and friendship being a very formal thing in Theodish belief because there's obligations to it, right? It's not just a matter of liking someone. So, any given Theodsman may have a dozen different oaths binding him to other people in his Theod and throughout the Theodish region. We also have a great emphasis on, obviously, anything that is an ancestral religion, right? The other side of it being an ancestral religion is it's not just the dead that you pay attention to, right? It's also the children. That's on the other side of that, right? So ancestral religions are often fertility cults as well, right? So there's that great emphasis not just upon having children, but rearing children. Don't think that in contemporary heathenry there's been enough emphasis upon that. Matter of fact, we've got a book that just came out, Wordsmith's Ich Sprache Anglo-Sax, which is a book to teach children Old English, right? Perfect little introduction. It's even got a digital audio book that one can purchase with it. We've also got booklets on going through the holy tides that we've put together. With different crafts and things of the sort that can be done for children. This is a draft, it's not for sale yet, but yeah, different crafts on how to make like a miniature maypole and discussions about what the maypole is, or summersting as we call it and such. So, that's actually something that the Theodisríce, the Wielandríce, in the next year is going to be spending a lot of time looking towards, because we've been at this now since 1976, right? And there are some Theodsmen who've been with it since 1976, but there's been a lot of people who've come and gone. I think that one of the things that we really need to be able to meet is the needs of those who have children. And so tying this into the agricultural seasons and helping the children with their understanding of that, one of the things that we in the Ealdríce Théod, which is the Théod here in Richmond, Virginia, are doing is we've now set up a communal garden here at Whithinge Hall, and divided up plots. And so the different roof trees or households in the Théod, when they monthly come to moot, we'll spend some time in the garden. And of course, this is a great opportunity to begin teaching children about these things as well. So
I think
it touches a little bit on it, but also the other aspect is I think what you see in neo-paganism and a neo-heathenry that you don't see in Theodish belief as much is I think they take a very post-Christian approach to religion, and they see religion as I said, a set of beliefs, a set of practices that just anyone can adopt. Whereas to become a Theodsman, it's not just a matter of liking Theodish belief enough. You have to worth yourself a Theodsman, from the Old English word werthon, to become, which is related to weird, right, as in fate, right? So you must go through a process of worthing yourself a Theodsman. So Theodsman, those who would be Theodsmen will seek out another Theodsman to be their laro, to be their mentor, and to take them into learnership so they can become their learner, their learner, right? And learnership can be, it's really, it's not just about learning. It's also not just about learning things of the old belief. It's also about unlearning, right? Unlearning beliefs, attitudes, values, and behaviors, right? Unlearning not just Christianity, but even post-Christianity, unlearning postmodernism and various philosophies and such. And it's also a period of acculturation to really understand what it is to be a Theodsman and to be a part of a Theodish society. So there is, like I said, we have, Theodsmen have their freedom, they have their individuality. It's encouraged, right? We're always encouraging one another to develop themselves, however we see fit. But it's in service of a community. It's in service of our chosen community. So we have this freedom, right? In service of our chosen community. And because we have that community to draw from, it makes us, in one sense, more free to be individuals, right? Because we're not always having to redefine everything. We don't have to do it all. We can be a part of something. So
I think that's interesting because, looking into just this sort of system that you're speaking of here, I had heard a lot of things, and when you're doing research, you got to be careful where you do research from, because some things are not always as friendly as others, and you want to make sure like you're getting the right sort of messaging of what you're reading. So one of the things I was curious about is that sort of, for lack of a better word, hierarchical or I don't want to say caste system, but something like that, because I know when you are going down this road that you were kind of discussing there of worthing someone, you're basically saying, are you want to make sure that they are connected to the tribe. You want to make sure that they are bringing good things into the tribe and things of that nature. But this is a place of growth, right? This is a place of growth for the person, that they're not meant to stay in a thrall state. I've heard that word thrall a couple of times, but I'm not sure if that's a Theodish name or is that's what it's just called somewhere else that I was researching. But I'm curious how that system grows. Is that a different sort of caste system based on the Théod that you're a part of, or is that kind of a universal
right
across all Theodish belief?
So there are arangs in Theodish belief. So there are different, caste may be too strict of a word. Word ar means honor, so it's like an honoring, right? But there are those who have different roles. And so it's not entirely horizontal. There is some sort of stratification in Theodish society, but it's usually based upon one's accomplishments, one's deeds, right? How much they have continued to worth themselves, and the roles and responsibilities that they've taken on, right? So it's their duty also to the Théod and to the Theodsmen of the Théod. The term thrall is one that you have to understand that when Theodish belief was rediscovered in 1976, right? It was a different world back then. And it was a bit of the Wild West in a sense, right? And they were operating with, they didn't have all the resources we have today, right? Matter of fact, we owe it to them to have done the things that they did, because we stand upon their shoulders. They broke the ground for us. Well, there was a lot of experimentation. One of the terms was like, what do we call a new person who's worthing themselves? And for whatever reason, they settled the term thrall, and it was used for much of Theodish history. But there's a lot of problems with the term thrall, because thralls weren't weren't slaves, right? And it just was kind of a term. So in the year 2000, when Garman published Way of the Heathen, he introduced a new term, learning white. And learning white didn't quite stick either, because it just sounded, first of all, it's two words, right? It's not just one word. And then in 2010, the Ealdríce introduced the term lærna. Lærna means learner, right, or apprentice. And that has since become the official term in Theodish belief. But like I said, why do we refer to it as thraldom for so many years? Because when you're breaking new ground and no one's ever done it before, you don't see how things are, and how they may appear to others. But Theodism, we found it to be a stumbling block over the years. It just, because it's important for us that our words mean what they mean. And this was a word that didn't mean what it meant. And therefore, there's the danger of some sort of role playing. And role playing is the true enemy of real religion.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And you want to find something that is going to encourage people to continue learning and growing and pulling that goodness into the community.
Right.
I wanted to ask you about, and I know we started to talk a little bit about it, and you talked about Yule and some of these other traditions, but I am curious about how Theodsmen go about, honoring the old gods, and what are some of those important ancient rites and traditions, not just kind of the special holy days throughout the year, but how do you approach that on a daily or weekly basis as an individual as well, to reconnect and show that you're honoring the gods and finding that wisdom through them?
Well, I think one of the things that Theodsmen do that may be a bit different is we don't assume that the gods would be that they want necessarily our sort of post-Christian contemporary ways of worshiping them, right? And so what we try to do is we try to worship them as they were once accustomed to being worshipped by our ancestors. We don't simply assume that, oh, well, in the 1500 years that passed, they would be okay with this, right? So we worship in Old English when we speak to the gods. Most Theodsmen do. So we will, the bades, I guess what you might say is prayers, or the gelders, the songs and so forth, that we sing to the gods. When we speak to the gods, we tend to do so in Old English. In our feignings, the most common Theodish rite is a feigning. It means a celebration. It's simply where an offering is made, typically a mead offering or ale offering or such. And we will feign the holy tides. So when we hold the holy tides, we'll hold feignings to various gods and such. But yes, the way of it thing, the priest will speak in Old English. Some of the folk, when they speak to the gods, will speak in Old English as well. But while they're in the frith yard, right, the holy stead, or the hagtraff, or the temple tent, or whatever the holy stead might be, more often than not, English is spoken rather than English. English being now tidely English without words from the Latinish tongue. Mm-hmm. And that word string or sentence was English. So, for example, we might say, "Gar my lord beheld the there witness of Woden," instead of "Gar my lord saw a vision of Woden," right? So there's that way of speaking, because it shifts. Words are powerful. Words are a type of magic, right? And they shift your consciousness, right? So it's just Old English to the gods. Typically, the way of it, when he speaks to the folk, will speak in English. Oftentimes, you'll find Theodsmen speaking in English to one another. And then, of course, English, right? English gets thrown in as well. So it is, sometimes you have to make yourself known, be the English way, or sometimes you have to communicate, which would be the English way of saying that, right? So we do quite a bit of that. So language is very important in our worship. Poetry is very important in our worship. So the words that we speak to the gods, the gelders and bades, they're done in alliterative verse and certain poetic meters that were known to our Germanic ancestors. And Theodsmen sometimes will use a herp, which is like a lyre, to pluck and to gelder to the gods. I don't know if you've seen listened to his works or not, but Alfric, Flavor of Ravensshire Theod in British Columbia, this is a CD. I know this is a flashback from the 90s, but he has a Bandcamp page now where he has several albums of songs in Theodish gelders in Old English, some in Old Continental Saxon, some in Norse, some in the Old Gothic tongue.
That's fantastic. If you don't mind, I'm gonna get that information from you, and I'll just put it in the link for whenever we post this video.
Sure.
And people can go and and learn about the Ealdríce. They could learn about the music there. And I think that'd be fantastic, because one of the things that I wanted to ask you about is, it can be kind of hard for somebody, especially if they perhaps aren't living near a Théod, to do that research themselves. If they're interested, they find some sort of inner calling that they want to learn more, something that's pulling at them. So how would you tell somebody who is feeling that pull to get started? How can they? Are there people that, like the Ealdríce, that they can reach out to? What are some research resources, books and things that they can start reading to start learning and growing?
Well, so the Vinlandríce, they should reach out to the Vinlandríce, right? And so we've had people as far away as Tasmania. So in the Vinlandríce, we have Appledore Hall in Tasmania, and Frithric Thane, the steward of Appledore Hall, entered into learnership to myself, I don't know, almost 10 years ago or something. And the poor fella had one of the world's longest learnerships. Typically, if you can meet in person and they can attend the holy tides throughout the year, learnership can be a year-ish, sometimes a little less, often a little more, right? But I think his lasted 6, 7, 8 years or something, right? But that was because we have to rely on letters and emails and video chatting when this technology became reliable several years back. And so there was a lot of that, because, how do you acculturate someone to a different tribal custom, right? The customs and traditions of a different sort of society. I mean, fortunately, he was an Anglophile, and he had a significant understanding of heathenry, ancient heathenry himself, to bring to that, but it still took a great deal of time. That said, not everyone is in Tasmania. This technology has improved, where it was very difficult for him to be able to fly up here to attend gatherings. Someone in, Florida, just hop on, be here in a few hours, right? If you do that a couple times a year, it gives you certainly a lot more experience than you would have otherwise. It's not necessarily perfect, right? But, we have Théods in New York, we have Théods in Virginia, in British Columbia, and Tasmania. So there are ways of going about it. And the Vinlandríce is currently growing. So I would encourage them to reach out to the Vinlandríce, because it may be that they can become what's called a Verlearner, a far learner, right? And it's a little slower process of working themselves, but there are ways that it can be done. Yeah. And typically, they'd be given some books to read. Reading these books, checking them off, does not make one a Theodsman. It's really the shift in worldview, the shift in one's, what James C. Russell in the Dramatization of Early Middle Christianity would call the BAVB, the beliefs, attitudes, values, and behaviors, right? That sort of not just having the Theodish or heathen veneer, but that underlying BAVB. That's what we look for to change, right? But there's some things recently. So the Vinlandríce has its own publishing arm called Hadagild Books, and we republish old Theodish classics from 20, 30 years ago, and we publish new Theodish works as well. One of the things we've been doing recently is collecting many of Garman Lord's classic articles that he wrote and putting them together in volumes. So we've got the Yasitha Handbook, which is called An Introduction to Theodish Belief, and other writings of Garman Lord on Anglo-Saxon Theodish Belief. So that's available at Hadagild. More recently, we came out with From the Gift Stool, which is a second collection of some of his writings. And as far as understanding how to reckon time, there's a book called By the Sun, the Stars, and the Moon, Anglo-Saxon Heathen Timekeeping. This is not really a page turner as much as it is a reference guide to be able to work out the calendar, because our calendar is a solunar calendar. Our months are lunar, right? But the years are solar. And so there has to be a way to make that work. And every 19 years, the lunar year and the solar year line up, right? And within that 19 years, we have to have 7 leap months to make, this work. So this is a lot of times a book that Anglo-Saxon Theodsmen might have just on their desk when they're writing something and they kind of need a bit of reference there. A deeper dive into the month by month holy tides that we celebrate, like Moldernich coming up, the Night of the Mothers. We'll also have a Boar's Head feast soon. We'll have Twelfth Nick, we'll wassail the apple orchards. Sword Monarch, some of these other ones. Those are covered in a book called To Hold the Holy Tide. It's a collection of articles of the Anglo-Saxon heathen ritual year, its keeping and its customs. So this is probably, we've got a lot of good feedback on this one. This seems to be a pretty popular one. If someone's looking for something more like master's level type reading material, there is a Ghost and God Poles, Danish essays pertaining to the reconstruction of Saxon heathen belief, both Old and Anglo. Just said this, essentially what this was meant to be a guidebook on how Theodsmen go about reconstructing. So I take 6 different topics and I go through whether comparative mythology, whether it's linguistics, whether it's historical studies, anthropology, whatever it may be, and sort of show some of the tools that we have in our toolbox and how to go about that. But it's not light reading. So my master's thesis isn't there. So for the Theodish priesthood, there is a collection of different articles that have been written on that called In Hallowed Groves, Observations of the Ancient Anglo-Saxon Heathen Priesthood with Thoughts on its Renewal within Theodish Belief. All Theodish books have to have long titles. So this is more one that Wavethanes would sort of take a look at. This, if you read it, it's not going to tell you how to do a feigning, but it's going to talk about some of the various thews and customs associated with feigning the gods, things that might be forbidden, things that must be required, and such. For those who follow an Old Saxon custom, there are some Theodsmen who do. There's the Old Saxon Galdr book, which is a list of different Bades and Galders in Old Saxon. So these things have to be composed in Old Saxon and then translated to English. So you have to think it in the Elder tongue. If you just write something out in English and you translate it, you're not going to have the meter, you're not going to have the alliteration, you're certainly not going to have all the different bits of wisdom and insight that come from exploring it in the original tongue. So a lot of times these will have the original language on top and then translations below, and they're typically all fairly well footnoted. So the one for those most Anglo-Saxon, most Theodsmen are Anglo-Saxons, the Old English Galdr book is actually extensively footnoted. So you might have, so this is our Hlaftid Bed to the god Beowa, and also known as John Barleycorn in English folk song. So you've got, it's not long, maybe it's like 12 lines, but then you've got 2 pages of footnotes there, right? Citing the historical sources that these things are drawn from, the poetic allusions, going a bit into some of maybe the grammar behind, so, some of the wording and such. We also have Wordsmith's Anglo-Saxon Grammaticraft, which is similar to the children's one, but this is for adults. It doesn't yet have a recording for it. I think that might be something we're working on, but that's just another resource we have for that. And then, of course, we have quarterly, we put out the Wind and Reach. It doesn't just have music it puts out, it doesn't just have books it puts out, but it has a quarterly journal that it puts out. It's fully in color, called Spellstow, Tidings of the Wind and Reach, and it will typically feature a number of different articles as well as bannings. So bannings are bits of news, pictures from gatherings. Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah. Classic Theodish articles being republished. Sometimes Theodish authors will test out new articles before they get compiled into a larger work. But Spellstow has been a great resource for us. So
that's fantastic. And I'm curious to go back real quick. You mentioned learning about that priesthood aspect. Maybe somebody's even considering, hey, I don't have a Theod around here. Maybe I want to become a learner and go down that path of aiming towards starting a Theod in my region. Is that a different sort of path? Does that have to be approved in some way by the Winland Reach?
Yes.
That this person is entitled and can at this point actually do that now?
So anyone can feign the gods, right? You don't have to be a Wavethain to feign the gods. If you have a horn or a cup or a bottle of ale and a bowl in your home, you can say holy words and make an offering to the gods, right? And you do that on behalf of yourself or behalf of your roof tree. Become a Waverthain or a Blodra or some other sort of Theodish priest requires one to admission into the Waverthain Guild. And what the Waverthain Guild is it's the Blodra, it's the priesthood of the Wind and Reacher, and it's also its seminary. So, okay. Yes, we have curriculum outlined for that as well. And even though if you are wanting to go in that particular direction, someone is, but first need to worth themselves as a Theodsman, to enter the leadership and then be recognized as a Theodsman at some point, and swear some sort of oath to get into the Wind and Reacher, to be tied into the web of oaths there. And at that point, they can then petition to enter into the Waverthain Guild, and as typically, as long as they're a Theodsman in good standing, some sort of admission, is given. There are different types of holy roles that one can fulfill in Theodish belief. One doesn't have to be a Waverthain, even though it's called the Waverthain Guild. That would put someone on a different path, but not everyone who leads a Theod is a priest, right? So in Theodish belief, the leader of a Theod is known as a Hlavr, means a loaf warder, and typically, or if it's a lady, she'll be known as a Hlafdia, which means loaf kneader. And these are the words where we get the words Lord and Lady from, right? And they will be essentially the leader of the Theod. They themselves may perform the feightings. They may make the offerings before the gods and goddesses, right? But they may also have a Waverthain that does that for them. Right? So they may some of them are much more of administrative leaders. Good administration is important to a local Theod. Got to keep the trains running on time.
There's something that I'm interested about, because just studying some Asatru belief, I kind of understand some of the worldview there of what is those core virtues, I guess you would call them, that someone is supposed to hold within themselves. I'm curious because, when you think back to something, Christianity, you would have, humility and honesty and chastity and certain things that are considered maybe Christian virtues. What are Theodish virtues and that worldview that you want people to kind of realign themselves to?
So there are typically 4 reeds, sometimes they're referred to, that Theod's been generally ascribed to. Now, these are really just summarizations of a lot of deeper thought that's been given to these topics. But the first one is what's called a right goodwill, and every Theodsman must bear a right goodwill towards all other Theodsmen, meaning that they cannot act with hidden agenda or ulterior motive. We do not brook internal politics at all, right? You must act towards another Theodsman and speed them, seek to further them as you would yourself in your own calling. It's very important, or at least to not hinder them, right? The other 3 are known as the 3 wounds, the 3 joys, right? And because each begins with a W, which in Old English is the wound, or the wound rune, which means joy. And those are wisdom, and that's very important because, Theodish belief is many things, and one of the things is it's the wisdom tradition, right? And so wisdom, meaning wise doom, wise judgment, is paramount, and this also encompasses learning and things of the sort. Then there is Reladal, wealth deal, right? This is essentially generosity, hospitality. These are all sort of combined in there. And then there is Werthmund, worth mind, which is honor, character, right? Your motivation for something. And so typically the 3 wins a Theodsman, when they run into a particular situation, maybe someone has asked them for some money, and so as a matter of Weladal, they think, well, this person's in need, I should give them money, right? And then the Worthmoon may come in and say, well, is it right to give this person money, right? By doing this, am I helping them? And are they a good person to give this money to, right? And then wisdom may come in and say, okay, so if we do this, we agree that we should do this, right? How much should we give, right? So that we do not, cause a burden upon our own roof tree. And so there's been a lot of times the 3 wounds will interact with one another in that regard. So there's a lot more to it than that. There's also notions of frith, which is essentially security or peace, which must be retained in a fellowship. There is the notion of innenjard and utenjard. So inside the fellowship, inside the yard versus outside the yard, right? So a lot of times ancient farmstead civilization was seen as inside the yard, right? Inside the fence. And the wilderness with giants and outlaws and wolves and things was on the outside. But of course, it's not always an us versus them, right? So there are also other settlements, there are also other farmsteads. And so you have to use wisdom in terms of thinking about that. But obviously our obligations towards one another are greater than our obligations towards strangers, right? So that's one of those things that might play in. So there's a lot of, there's a good book called, I'm not sure if it's still in print, called We Are Our Deeds, that a Theodism wrote many years ago. But one of the notions is, so Theodism must work themselves, right? So werthan, to become, so we become what our deeds are, right? So we are our deeds. So yeah, there's an emphasis upon gift giving, upon honoring oaths, honoring one's word, upon wisdom and things of the sort. We don't really have it, as you might see in some other traditions, these 12 things written out, or these 9 things to check off. Even the 3 winds, right? We've kind of distilled it down because we really don't want a list. We don't want people to, because our ancestors didn't have a list of commandments or things that they had to follow, right? What was good is what's good for the Yard, what's good for the folk, what's good for the tribe. What's evil is that which is bad for the Yard, which causes harm to the tribe, which causes harm to the folk, which is a detriment to other Theodsmen.
Absolutely.
So it's more of a communal morality.
That's kind of what I want to, that's a good segue into one of my final questions here is you talk about, the tribe, which is essentially an extension of the family, an extension of your family is what I would see a tribe as, when just thinking about to the roots of the word, but, and giving resources for the parents of the tribe to be able to teach their children this and kind of continue that tradition, which is extremely important so that it doesn't die out and become something of the past. How do you foresee Theodism moving forward? What is the goal? Is there a grand vision that you see, or perhaps Garmin Lord has seen that you've see a growth of Theodism, or is it something that you think can't be pushed or proselytized is maybe not the best word, but do you feel like people need to come to Theodism itself, or is there going to be continued push to grow it?
So we seek to be wise in the ways in which we grow, right? So that's why we have the process of people worthing themselves. Really, it's a proving period, right? And you can't grow it so fast that way, right? We just simply can't throw open the doors and everyone who wants to be Theodish is suddenly Theodish, because there are a great many people who want to be Theodish that we may not want to be Theodish, right? So criminals and convicts and things of the sort, right? All sorts of unsavory types that we must protect the Indiad from. We must protect the Theod and the Ealdríce from, and our children from, right? So careful, mindful growth. Now, we have done things. So, for example, the Ealdríce back in, I think, 2018 went to the Manassas Viking Festival, and we set up a headed traff, a temple tent, and there were several hundred people that came through there that day, maybe 1,000. And I'm sure about 200 or so either not just they came and talked to us directly, but stood around. We held 3 feignings publicly that day. Now it's pretty out there for Theodsmen. We don't normally, go out there that far, but we really just wanted to see what it was like to talk to people who, they don't have an Ulster background, they don't have a Wiccan background, they don't have some sort of neo-pagan or neo-heathen understanding. What is it like to talk to brand new people, right? And it was good, and it was fairly well received. I think in the whole day we only had one sort of bad remark, and it was just a man who was frustrated that we existed. So that was it. A lot of people were, so are you reenactors? We're like, no, this is our religion. This is what we do. We earnestly believe this. And that blew a lot of people away. It was a good experience. We ended up gaining a number of good folk. So good folk are those who attend Theodish gatherings somewhat regularly, and they have an open invite, but they're not letterners. They haven't chosen to become Theodsmen yet. So maybe they're going to stay in their own religious belief. We have a good folk who attends almost every one of the Ealdríce's gatherings, who's an elderly Episcopalian gentleman. And he loves to come over and to be blessed by the gods, and to, of course, have some of the mead and watch the ladies jump over the fire at midsummer and dance the maypole and such. It's good for the heart. So
that's fantastic. I would absolutely love to come and witness a fan sometime, and I think it'd be great, maybe as a follow up to this, and give people a additional deeper understanding of some of those rites and traditions.
Sure.
I think understanding is something that, in modern day is kind of hard. We've gotten into a process of tribalization in a different way, in a negative way, not what you're saying, to where we don't even attempt to understand other folk and what they're doing on a deeper sense. And we just predetermine what we believe their intent is. And that's not healthy at all.
No. I agree. In fact, we had an anthropology student come and observe a feigning a couple of years ago. So it was nice. I think she was working on her master's degree, and she came out to do a paper on us, to observe us. And the poor thing had to drive halfway across the state, and it was for our Sulmanoth gathering, which begins before dawn. We've got a couple gatherings that begin pretty early in the morning. Most of them are in the mid-afternoon at a convenient time, but this is one where we follow an ancient Anglo-Saxon rite called the Akkerboot, which survives from the 10th century. And it's an odd ritual. It's to bless the fields and make them fertile. And it refers to Christ and to some saints, but also to the Earthen-moder, the earthen mother, and speaks of the earth as a she and as a goddess and such. And so it's kind of from a very late synchronistic period there. And of course, we've just trimmed the Christian trappings and hold the heathen portions of it, but involves blessing the plow and cutting the first furrow and laying the soul cake into the first furrow and such. And so she got to come out for that. So I know she left where she lived, I think in Hampton Roads, probably about 3 a.m.
Wow.
And came out. But she was a wonderful guest. We loved having her. We've been in some correspondence since. I think that she would have continued to come to some gatherings, but then there was a strange, sickness and plague that went throughout the land, and that interfered with a lot of things. It didn't prohibit us from holding our holy tides. For us, it's our belief that we receive hal, luck or health or goodness, right, from the gods. And so, for us, the whole notion that we would not gather to make offerings to gods to seek health and wholeness from them during a plague was unfathomable. That was when we absolutely needed to be here.
And that would in my mind, do the opposite effect. It isolates people. It causes them to have, severe depression and a sense of, you need that sense of community and people looking out for you and your best interest. Mental health, I think, has completely been forgotten in a lot of this process, and spiritual health too, which is a big key part of that mental health, I believe. But I want to thank you so much for your time. And I realized I apologize, but I don't think I fully introduced you at the beginning of this. So I sincerely apologize for doing that, because we just jumped into everything.
Sure.
I'm going to do my best not to butcher the saying of your name, because my last name gets butchered all the time on a regular basis. Regolith is not something that people have an interesting or have an easy time saying. So is it Þórbeorht? Is that how you pronounce that?
Yes, you got it.
All right. So Þórbeorht is from the Ealdríce. Again, this is the Théod in the Richmond, Virginia area. And I'm going to put some information at the bottom of this video that will show you some resources, the website of the Ealdríce, and as well as where you can find some of their books. Þórbeorht, if you could send me some additional information about the music that you showed there, just so
Sure.
I can make sure that that gentleman is, people are going to his exact spot and can find his music. And is there anything else that you want to say before we end here?
Just thank you for having me on. This has been a great experience. You're a very gracious host, and I was glad to have the opportunity to come speak about Theodish belief to an audience that largely had not heard of Theodish belief before. Typically, we're talking about it with people who already have some background or familiarity with it. And it's something we realize that, as we seek to grow, because we do seek to grow wisely, right? We're going to have to become more accustomed to speaking to that sort of audience. So thank you so much for this.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for your time. And I will be reaching back out to Þórbeorht in the future to go to one of these trainings. So stay tuned for that, because I would absolutely love to attend one. And thank you very much again. And you guys stay tuned for future episodes as well. We've got several speakers coming up. We're going to talk about the Crusades, and we're going to talk about a number of other big topics. So thank you very much for your time again, sir.
Thank you.
All right. Have a good day.
Wassail.